Hello, my name is Gretchen Musicant, and I am a member of the Social Justice Ministry team, and I'm here to introduce one of our social justice forums. We are pleased today to have Adair Mosely, and I will introduce him in a moment. But first, I wanted to talk about what our theme this year for all forums is. Our theme is Wade in the Water, Becoming Anti-Racist. Because of COVID-19, we are using new formats and are pleased to have so many options available through Westminster. Capitalizing on those options, we are pre-recording today, and so you will be able to hear the forum, and you'll also be able to see that some people are submitting questions, but as a viewer, you will not be able to answer active questions. So today's focus is nutrition and food access, building on community strengths and ownership. Adair Mosely is the president and CEO of Pillsbury United Communities, a pioneering social service agency guided by a vision for thriving communities where every person has personal, social, and economic power. A passionate change maker and relentless strategic innovator, Adair seeks radical and inclusive solutions to the community's most urgent needs, co-created with the people most affected. Adair's bold strategic framework for Pillsbury United, adopted in 2019, moved the agency's focus upstream to building infrastructure and collaborations that addressed multidimensional social issues at the population level. In 2020, he launched Justice Built Communities, an equitable economic development corporation created to prevent gentrification and displacement and prioritize wealth creation in BIPOC communities. As Pillsbury United's Chief Innovations Officer, he led a capital campaign to build North Market, a first of its kind grocery store and wellness center that's transforming food access, community health, and economic vitality in North Minneapolis. In 2019, Adair was selected to represent the Twin Cities region at Harvard Business School's Young American Leaders program. He's been named one of GRIS's 50 Fixers, individuals cooking up the boldest solutions to humanity's biggest challenges, and received the Local Legend Award from the General Mills Foundation for the embodiment of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision and legacy. We're so pleased to have you here today, Adair, and excited to hear from you about the vision that you've been able to work towards through your work at Pillsbury United, and then also the insight you have on how did we get here and how can we move forward to a different place?
Yeah,
thank you, Adair.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to share what I believe will take us forward. I've often said, whether you've been on the road of fighting injustices all your life, or you're just now coming to understand the deep systemic injustices that rest in our country, it does not matter. What matters is that we are here together, and where we go from here matters. And so I think that this is a moment where all people, and I appreciate that this congregation is really leaning in to what it can do. And that starts with the self-examination of oneself, and also the institutions in which we serve and do our work out into community. So I applaud you all for having these uncomfortable conversations, but knowing that on the other side of this truly is glory. I have really the deep fortunate to be able to steward a 140-year-old human services community impact organization that's rooting its work in social justice. And we believe that people deserve a voice in decisions that affect them, that cultural understanding is essential to social connections, and that communities get stronger when opportunity is shared, and that a just society is truly one where everyone has power. And so we are community builders, co-creating enduring change toward a just society, and we will not rest until every person has the personal, social, and economic power. You know, one of the realizations after you've been doing this work of serving community, you understand and you ask yourself, what does a moment need from its leaders? And you alluded to the strategic framework in which we elevated last year, and that was the exact question that we were asking ourselves as an institution. What does this moment need? And I believe that this moment needs us to be thinking about the systemic issues that rest. It needs us to be thinking about the systems and infrastructures and policies that exacerbate downstream inequities. It really needs us to go big. It needs us to have a relentless drive towards creating social change. It needs us to be bold and transformative. It needs us to be unapologetic in this moment. And so part of the work that we are doing as an agency and an institution is really taking big bets. And it's a lot of doubling down on much of what you've described in the opening, Gretchen, that we need to be thinking about the interconnectedness of systems, our food systems in our community, how food arrives to the tables of individuals in our communities, the inequities around access. We need to be thinking about healthcare. We need to be thinking about education. We need to be thinking about housing. And we also need to understand that all of this work is interconnected. You know, I'm sure you all are aware, and as you delve deeper into looking at racial justice, you can't separate the historical context right here in this city that built communities, that redlined communities, for example, in the North Minneapolis community, redlined them, and policies on our books, even racial covenants on deeds today that restricted access for African Americans to be able to move into economic prosperity. And it put communities of color, particularly Black communities, adjacent to high industrial areas. And today, the community has some of the highest kind of inequities around asthma rates and other things, because this was intentional. That communities we didn't decide this for ourselves, that it's truly systemic in policies that were on our books that have disenfranchised generations. But the one thing about people, and the one thing that I know about my people, is that we're resilient, and we will make a way out of no way. And even when we build our communities up, for example, like the Rondo community, and we thrive, then we know that policies come through and decisions come through that affect us that don't have our input in it. And so our communities were destroyed even when we had economic prosperity in our hands, Black and brown businesses. And so this is a moment of also reckoning with that past, and then also charting what this future looks like. So I truly thank you all for having me today to really start to unpack this more specifically from a place of food justice. So I'll pause there and see if you have an immediate question, Gretchen.
Thank you, Adair. And I think you really laid out kind of some of the factors of how we got to where we are today. As we think about the food system in particular, can you talk a little bit more about how those factors kind of come together around food, and then what are the opportunities for us to build a new way going forward?
Yeah. Again, I go back to my opening statements, is that when you look at the racial inequities that are in community, what has happened is a categorical kind of disinvestment in Black and brown communities. And so where you see disinvestment, you see blight, you see poor education outcomes, you see housing inequity, less home ownership. And then you have, from a market-driven approach, you have people saying that community is not worthy of investment. And when you get that, you get further marginalization and disenfranchisement, which is why communities of color, not only here in Minneapolis, but across our country, and even I'll insert even rural areas that have limited access to high quality food. And that was one of the realizations as part of us developing North Market. We've always done what I describe as charity, meeting the basic needs of community. And so we have culturally relevant food shelves. We have community cafes that are serving highly nutritious food. But there was something that happened in our thinking, and which is kind of embedded in the DNA of this organization, is to really be highly entrepreneurial. And when we went out to community, what we found as we were trying to solve, and you know this story, Gretchen, we were trying to solve for WIC underutilization. So WIC is the Women, Infant, and Children's Program, and access to, which is early childhood nutrition for children up to 5 years old. And what families really unearthed for us was what we heard was their aspirations for a better community. What we heard was their desire to have quality in their community. What we heard was, I have to travel on a bus and sometimes taking 2 buses to be able to get to the grocery store. And I think in this moment, we can solve for these problems through a very traditional charity infrastructure. It would have been relatively easy for this institution to stand up another food shelf. Or we can move this work more upstream in what I described and having the level of transformative impact in community, and about putting asset and access and opportunity near residents that live and labor in community. And so that's where we decided to plant our flag, which ultimately was the development of a grocery store. Now, because there's so many, again, categorically kind of injustices that are in our community, you really, really have to work hard to get it to work from a market-driven place. So I want to recognize that it takes a lot of effort, because you do have individuals that are not making living wage and less disposable income that you would have in other communities. But we know one thing that and the thing that I say the most, that beyond just providing healthy foods in terms of when we open that grocery store or putting that in proximity to people, the thing that it did the most is restore the dignity of a community. And it's this basic necessity of accessing groceries that that when you stand an enterprise up like that, it restored the dignity, and it changed the narrative in community around what is possible for this place that you live. And that it doesn't have to be one of despondency and brokenness. And the narratives that we often write about Black and brown communities is that we can have access and we can have opportunity, and we can really create ownership, that people feel like they see themselves in the work. And so I think that that is the thing that we've really been on this journey as an institution.
I certainly understand the juxtaposition of the notion of charity and system change. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to shift from one of those to the other? Because I think even in an institution like ours, a church, helping,
Yep.
you know, which often translates to charity, is something that's quite familiar to us. And yet in these times that we're facing, and the calls are just for so much more than can be accomplished with helping. So if you could help us think about, how do we go from that one kind of helping to really grappling with what we have come to see as just the way things are, but they don't need to be that way.
What I would say is both are going to be needed. Right, you'll always have communities that will be in need of charity, and truly the embodiment of Christ is that. But what I will tell you is that we have many institutions here that are only thinking about that, and what that does, and which is why we've really tried to hone up this kind of innovation and entrepreneurial spirit of the organization, and really thinking disruptive, like disruptive thinking, I think is needed in moments to be able to get out of these systemic and legacy kind of injustices that we have in our community. Charity gives us a false sense of progress. And charity, it's incremental improvement. And we pat ourselves on the back because we gave out 20,000 pounds of food. But what we need in this moment is to recognize that we're only creating a cycle. We're creating this perpetual cycle of people continuing to come back to our doorsteps. And we have to be thinking about what is bringing them to our doorsteps. And that's that systems level thinking. In this moment, that is the only work that's left on the table. We have centuries of charity work, and I don't want to take away this kind of altruistic kind of feeling that like we all get as individuals, right? And we see ourselves in other people's stories, and so giving them something in that moment to meet the acute needs is absolutely necessary. But what I've been trying to focus our organization is that we have to work at both ends of the spectrum. And good charity work, if you're only going to do good charity work, it should be informing something larger. And so what I've really pointed out in our institution is that what brings people to our doorsteps, how do we glean the insights? How do we take their aspirations and their dreams for community and remove the systemic barriers that stand in the way of human progress? And this is really about what we need in this moment. And if we are to get this right, if we are to come out of this, there's parity and there's justice, on the other side of that, it is not charity. It is going to say, how do we leverage and wield our power and our influence, our resources? How do we change policies that we know shape communities in inequitable ways and marginalize? We use policies to weaponize and disenfranchise. We know that this is going to be about white individuals standing up and using not only their privilege, but also their resources in this moment to move it on behalf of their brethren. And so this is exactly what we need in this moment. And I believe both COVID and the heinous murder of George Floyd has given us the realization that we are not doing enough upstream.
So I have a couple thoughts that maybe will lead to some further comments on your behalf. When I am truly engaged with people who have different life circumstances than I do or different worldviews, what I hope for is to be surprised, to hear things that would not have occurred to me. And so I'm wondering if you can share with us if that's happened in the way that you've talked about food or that you've heard from community. And then secondly, as you've mentioned, policies and the sort of the way we've organized ourselves in our society need to change. And especially as we look through the lens perhaps of food access or benefiting economically from the food system, or even the kinds of food that there is in the food system. Are there some policies that come to mind that you think are ripe for changing or that ought to be ripe for changing? So those a two-part question for you.
The one thing that occurs to me is I think when you're Father Gregory Boyle, if any of you know his work out of LA, but he says, when you're standing with people at the margins, I believe there's two things that you can offer them, and that's humility or hubris. And hubris says, here's what you need, and humility asks, what do you need? And people who are standing at the margins will always tell you what they need. And I think so much about, I think that the thing that while not extremely specific here, But the thing that I continue to be amazed at is when we tap into the innovation and the disruptive thinking of community, innovation emerges and solutions emerge. And oftentimes we go into community and we see them as deficits rather than looking and having an asset-based approach and looking at the assets and standing in awe of what people have to carry rather than in judgment on how they carry it. And because if it was any one of us, we know that we would not have been able to do it. And that there's something about the inherent kind of resiliency of people who have had all the odds stacked against them, yet getting up every day. And so I think that that's the thing that continues to amaze me about people that by all circumstances says that they should not have survived, but have built the resiliency and social connectedness in the community to withstand. And I think it's in our moment that we go in and ask as institutions and individuals saying, what do you really need? And when people tell us that we don't create another narrative saying, no, I think you actually need this. And I think that that is the thing that is going to get us to this place of freedom and justice. And I also, one of the tools that we use is human-centered design, which I think is a brilliant tool to start to unpack those exact questions, because it unlocks the creativity and innovation of individuals, and it puts them at the center of the kind of problem solving in community, and it shares the power. And oftentimes we see ourselves as being, rather because we have degrees or we have positions of power, that we are the experts. And human-centered design and other tools, right, says no, that you're the expert because you are the author of your life. And you know what you need more than I do. And I think it's in these moments that we intentionally listen to communities, and people will give us that insight. And we have to be able to wield the resources and the power in this moment to make it happen on behalf of them. And I do believe that that is going to be only systemic level work. Is that is the thing that will be unearthed, is that actually the things, there's not a family that wakes up that doesn't want the same for themselves and their family and the level of justice that a family in Edina wants, right? They both share it. What is missing is opportunity and access and of course all the resources that are available to make that happen. I also think that as you talk about policies around food access, there are things that need to continue to strengthen in family stabilization. So this is our basic programs. We need to continue to strengthen SNAP and WIC and food nutrition programs, because we know that those supplements ensure and reduce food insecurity. And are truly, and when they're on the table to be cut, and this is largely at a federal government level, when they're on the table to be cut, it really creates the need for more charity infrastructure in our community. I also believe there are policies, what we call is the fiscal cliffs, right? That we build people up over a period of time of giving them the types of benefits, whether they're TANF benefits or SNAP benefits, or even some financial support. And then the moment that an individual starts to stabilize in their life, we drop them off. And so it causes, and they fall off the fiscal cliff, as you know, Gretchen. And this is really detrimental to the communities. And what these programs do, and I think we have a moment in time to reinvent what they look like, because they actually disincentivizes growth and prosperity. And so they make individuals dependent upon them. Because if I have individuals that I've worked with and in institutions and people that we've served in the community who actually can't move, and we all know $15 an hour, even though we're saying is living wage, it's not living wage, right? We know that it doesn't provide for families. But if a family now moves into $15 an hour it will actually, from a federal poverty guidelines, make them ineligible for a lot of programs that provide stabilization. And so we are going to create, I think we need to think about all the unintended consequences of these, and how do we strengthen, yes, we need this living wage, but we need all the other systems and supports behind it, whether it's, access to health insurance, food support that continues to stabilize families. And so these are really innovative policies that I think we need to be thinking about at a holistic level. In addition, certainly there's been, and you've championed from the city, Healthy Corner grocery store initiatives, putting more fresh produce in access. But when we think about this ecosystem, we have to challenge ourselves in this thought that the most expensive thing in the grocery store is the healthiest for families. And so it is, and this is where we really need to be thinking. We are the home of the largest food makers in the world. And we need to be leveraging these companies. And I have very transparent conversations with the individuals that are leading these corporations around how do we increase access? How do we make it more affordable for healthy food consumptions in our communities? Which is one of the reasons why at North Market, our grocery store, on Wednesdays, and through the generous support of some donors, we were able to offer 50% off produce. And it's those kinds of innovative policies for low-income families that I think are really going to incentivize healthy eating and nutrition. And anecdotally, I hear families today who are saving their dollars for that Wednesday, because it's not that they don't have the lack of desire to feed their families healthy food. It is mere access and opportunity and disposable income. And so when you have the $30 or $40 and it needs to get you through a week, where you're not going in and buying a bunch of fresh produce, right? You're buying highly processed boxed food, maybe some meat, to be able to really stretch those dollars further. And so I really think that in this moment, we could be thinking about policies that do that. And I'll also say, as as part of this work, more access to, certainly we have a robust urban agriculture programs throughout the city, really incentivizing people to grow their own. We've tried to do some of that with the open lots and plots of land that are throughout the city. I think we could ramp that up. We've talked about CSAs, community supported agriculture, that I think could really be not only increase the supply, but be an economic driver in community. Right? Agriculture, it could, especially if we put it in an urban setting, could actually get more individuals into economic prosperity if we thought more innovatively about those policies.
Thank you. Very thought-provoking. One thing I heard you talk about was naming one of the assets that we see in all communities, and that's the social connectedness and social cohesion. Mm-hmm. And just wondering how we can, what it means to build on that as one of the strengths in community. And then a second piece of a question, we've touched on how important listening is. We don't all have opportunities to be in spaces where we can listen to each other. We live our lives pretty separately from one another. And so any ideas you have about helping us all get into places where we can be listeners to one another, I think would also be helpful.
Yeah, thank you. I've defined, and one of our core values as an organization is actually resiliency. And the thing, I think resiliency, while it is this thing of, we can't describe it as something of happenstance, right? of like, you get resiliency and I don't. I think that there's something about how we can build and foster resiliency in community. And what that actually comes down, it emerges from equitable systems. It emerges from infrastructure that is around individuals for their ability to be able to come back. And it's also about social connectedness and cohesion. And true resiliency it's inevitable that something is going to happen in all of our lives. Adversity is going to come to the doorsteps of every individual, that's listening and across our world. But their ability to bounce back from it heavily depends on what's the systems and their social connectedness and cohesion that they have to really weather that. And the more we can build that up in community, the more we can foster connectedness through individuals, is what I truly believe starts to give individuals resiliency. And so I tend to say we need to be intentional about how we create that in community, whether it's through our infrastructure. Anecdotally here again, the tornado came through North Minneapolis, right? And the reason why we're still talking about it a decade later and seeing the effects of still housing quality down, the investment in the community is down. In many ways, I think some of our corridors have actually gone backwards over the past decade, right? And this is all because we failed to put the policies and build up the systems in that community. So today, if a tornado goes through Edina, that community's ability to be able to come back from that looks a lot different than in some of the communities that are Black and brown, frankly, in this city or in this state. And so I think that that's the thing. But the other thing of that is, you don't go through 400 years of oppression and racism without having built resiliency, like as a collective people, and actual social connectedness. And so people are creating community, and there's a community, right? There's hidden communities everywhere. And so I want to also lift and honor that up, that yes, social isolation and it is a real thing, and we need to continue to think about social connectedness largely across difference. But people are building their own senses of communities, and so how do we tap into that? Listening is so important, and what I think the thing that the 21st century kind of tool that's needed is empathy. It is our ability to immerse ourselves in the lived experiences of others. It is our ability to suspend our own judgment and thought and our lived experiences to be able to experience that of others, that I think is going to be the thing that gets us to a more equitable and just society. And frankly, I think while we see such bias and polarization is the lack of empathy. It is the lack of just acknowledgement of what someone else has had to walk, and truly seeking to understand rather than to be understood. And, of course, we are all moving through these, homogeneous kind of spaces, right? Not only in our personal lives, but in our professional lives. So we have to be intentional about disrupting those spaces. The church can be a conduit for that, right? There's not a better moment that we can be doing than having the church from North Minneapolis join you all to foster connection and to foster really deeper understanding, to worship together, to share in kinship with each other. And I think that takes a level of intentionality, and that's about self. And so really, if we are to be listened, we have to be in proximity to those that we seek to understand better. And you can't hide behind the narratives of media about a community. you have to be able to get out on the ground and experience it for yourself, and experience really what an individual has to go through on a daily. And so this is a moment, I think, that we can, again, exemplify the core tenets and the teachings of Jesus, right? Is to really get out and be proximate to those that are standing at the margins. And I think that that is the thing, and that we humble ourselves and listening to individuals, and then we take that and we say we're going to do something with it and move it into action.
Thank you. Yes, and Westminster actually has a long-standing partnership with Liberty Church in North Minneapolis, but I think we have a lot more imagination we need to apply to really making the most of that relationship. And so thank you for that comment that had some direct bearing on what we as a church can do with a relationship that we have, but we could make more of.
Absolutely.
We had one question from someone really looking at how can Westminster and people from Westminster be of support to the work that you're trying to get done at Pillsbury?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think that because we're a multi-service organization, there's very, kind of low-hanging fruit of individuals wanting to come and volunteer. Whether it's in our food shelves or community cafe, or if it's in our out of school time youth. So just a plethora of ways for individuals and groups to be able to be involved. And then there's this thing, of course, right? We're always looking for individuals that want to offer their skills and talents, and so very skills-based volunteerism. And that's things from the systems work that I'm describing, or the infrastructure of an institution, right? Great work only happens when organizations have the capacity to be able to do it. And although it's not sexy, it's the thing that allows you to have great impact in community, because you're thinking about the kind of back end systems that help you propel and do great work in community. And then, of course, I never miss an opportunity to say when there's financial resources that people want to, that they see alignment with their own core values, and want to be able to support the work, the mission of this work through those resources. So just really a broad range of ways for people to be able to get involved. And so part of what we really do as an organization is, if Westminster says, we have a group of 10 people and we would love to do an activity, right? We have neighborhood centers, we have community and community programming that's happening to be able to put that group. And then if there's more individuals that say, I just really want to be involved, and then we would have that one-on-one discussion around fit, what fuels and gives individuals passion for the work, and be able to do some matching there.
Fantastic. Can you tell us a little bit more, like where is North Market? What if we wanted to visit there, buy groceries there, help out, that kind of thing?
Yeah, all of the above. So North Market is at 44th and Humboldt Avenue North. It is an area that I think is really transforming in North Minneapolis. North Market has been a catalyst for what I see as other economic development to happen along the 44th Avenue corridor. One great story I love to share is Houston White, who owns a barbershop directly across the street from North Market, has, because of its investment and revitalization in community, has now has wonderful and ambitious plans to redo his barbershop into a kind of entertainment and coffee shop. And so you see the benefits of putting a development like this in community, and it being an economic driver and a catalyst for other change. And so I'm really, really proud of that. it is beyond just meeting the basic needs of putting a grocery store in that community, which before it was, when there wasn't one, folks were about 3 miles in either direction, both north and south from the nearest grocery store. And before the Hy-Vee and Robbinsdale opened back up, when Rainbow closed, so you can think about, again, that kind of geographic span of a lot of communities not having access to a grocery store, which ultimately prompted us to pick that location. It is also this thing that I like to say that, when you put $7 million investment in community, you have to think about displacement, you have to think about gentrification, all of those things. And so we've really been thinking about building up ownership and thinking about the policy suites of things that are in and around our community. It's not that community doesn't want investment, but they want to be the beneficiaries of that investment. And so we have to be intentional about that. It was about us long before it was popular to think about living wages, to think about health benefits, and for all of our employees, 401k matching, so a very robust set of economic principles for our employees. It is, so beyond, again, that food access, it's an economic driver, it's a workforce development strategy. And then we're doing this great thing of building and fostering community. And it is, we have several contractors that we have on board that are doing health fitness. So from Zumba to hip hop aerobics to a plethora of just health and wellness activities. Any night of the week, and right now they're outside because of COVID and doing some social distancing. But any night of the week, you can drive by the store and around 6 p.m. and see about 50 to 60 primarily African-American women taking ownership of their health. And it is just so powerful to see that we're able to be a convening place and to be a place of health, that people see that in community. So we're really, really proud of that. We're doing cooking classes and food demonstrations. The other thing that we did with North Market that I think was important was the intersectionality of health. So one of our core partners is North Memorial Health. And the reason why we wanted to blend both health and hunger and really focus on diabetes, cardiovascular disease is actually outside of like our DNA, the thing that's really exacerbating those health disparities is actually our decision-making in grocery stores, right? It's the food we eat. And so we intentionally went to them to be able to blend those two things together. And so they have community wellness resource navigators, medication therapy management as part of it. A nutritionist is on site. And so all of those services are also a part of the model of North Market. So really robust in trying to change health outcomes of the community. I will also say that right behind North Market is a senior Minneapolis Public Housing Authority senior living, about 220 units. And you can, so those seniors didn't have immediate access to a grocery store then, but this goes back to the kind of social connectedness. We get seniors who walk over 3 and 4 times a day. Just right, like to be able to engage, to have this asset in their community. So you can very much see that it's creating. We're hosting things from the farmers market on the lot. So beyond, I often said when we were building this that we were building our 5th community center because we really wanted it to be this place that communities saw themselves and had access to beyond just the transactions of getting groceries.
Well, Adair, I've been there several times, and but it's still so delightful to have you describe all the things that are happening there, and I encourage people to go visit and go buy some groceries. it's a very visually pleasing place as well. And so, and I know that that's connected to Pillsbury's commitment to the arts as well. And so wondering if you could touch on arts and how that plays into this new way we want to have our communities organized and opportunities lifted up.
Yeah. As you stated, right, a deep commitment to the to arts and culture, and we believe that it can be a tool for social justice and change. You know, most of you know that we operate the theater on 35th in Chicago, Pillsbury House and Theater, that is really lifting up narrative through in storytelling through the theater. And the other thing is we've used arts to transform place. We were one of the leaders in the Arts on Chicago Avenue project, which was thinking about using arts to revitalize between 35th and 38th on Chicago, which has seen an immense amount of kind of transformation. And that's been something that we've been leveraging across our entire institution and in community placemaking or placekeeping. And creatively using arts to do that taps into that's culturally fitting for community. And that's no different that I think with North Market. There's two things that I think artists kind of play an important role in processes. So because they unlock a level of creativity and innovation, if we embed them in processes, and I know this is something the city has done, right? Putting arts in planning departments. Artists in planning departments that really get us to think about culturally place and using arts as that tool for change. And so we really try to embed creative thinkers as part of our process. And then the actual physical manifestation of arts, that it's about beautification. It's about for us, really, when in all the work that we're trying to do, it's about really tapping into the aspirations and the inherent beauty in community, and lifting and elevating that up as part of this work. And so North Market is no different than that. It's about elevating the experience of what people should expect. It's because you don't have the economic kind of resources at your disposal. That doesn't mean that you should have less than, right? That we really can change and shift the way you see yourselves in community. One other thing I failed to mention, if you come to North Market, and I think another way, when we get on the other side of this COVID thing, we love to host people in community. And I think that that's something that you all can be doing if you're not already, is how do you go out in the community to have these dialogues, that it doesn't always have to happen in the institution of the church, that part of building the longer table and being more empathetic is about getting out in community. So I often offer up both our community centers and North Market as a place to be able to convene, and which will give you a different experience, right? We have a wonderful, and I failed to mention this, a freight farm on the site. It's a hydroponic farm that we're really thinking about innovation in the food system. And so it's equal to about a little over an acre of growing space, all in a freight container. And so we're sourcing that, largely it's greens and herbs that are being grown in there. And then we're sourcing that back into the grocery store. We have some youth that are working. We do a lot with youth across our food system. So we had several youth actually working in community gardens this summer and sourcing their produce to small retailers and into the store, and teaching them the kind of entrepreneurial skills around like business development. And then we're also doing this with the hydroponic farm.
This may or may not be a question that you know the answer to, but if we think of North Minneapolis and the food system that's there, and so much has been changing in the last few years. There's with the community gardens and convenience stores having some additional food, and the North Market being present there, but how far away from being a greatly or an appropriately sourced community is North Minneapolis, or what more would be needed, or how can those things that have emerged grow to a place where the 70,000 people or so that live in North Minneapolis are well served by their choices to access food?
Yeah. I think before we answer that question, what we really need to be thinking about is kind of economic parity. And I actually believe that it should be one of our top priorities. That if we are not thinking about how we are going to grow, uh, grow the economics of Black and Brown communities, then ultimately the enterprises and the development that we put in community can't be sustained. And so, and I think those things are so intersectional, because I would tell you today, like if someone said, I want to open another grocery store in North Minneapolis, while an equal sized community, let's say Woodbury, uh, actually has 9 grocery stores, but it has the economics of that community to be able to sustain it. That's giving community choice. And so if anyone tells me they put another one, you could probably put a smaller format like convenient, right? But we have over 30 of those in North Minneapolis, so we really don't need that, right? Um, but putting another option there, I don't know that it could economically kind of sustain itself. So I actually think in this moment, what's needed across our communities is thinking about the economic justice of community, which is really where my focus has been. With you mentioned in the opening our development of justice built communities, which is a CDC, a community development corporation, and community quarterback. And it's really thinking about strategically developing place. How do we bring small businesses into the community that are Black and Brown owned? How do we develop our corridors that are dilapidated, that have not had the level of investment? And this was pre-George Floyd, right? And then vulnerable communities like North Minneapolis that saw some unrest are further like disenfranchised, right? Because there was already a categorical disinvestment that was in community. So if we're not thinking about economic parity, and now economics broader, right? I think in this moment, we have to be pulling multiple levers. And unfortunately, that's just where we're at. We have to think about what are the 1 or 2 levers that are going to give us the biggest return on investment. And we can talk about all of these building and standing up assets, but we have to recognize that right now, Black individuals are most infected by COVID, right? They're experiencing higher layoffs. They're, both Black and Brown and Latino Indigenous communities are working the frontline jobs that are oftentimes lower paid, but we know the necessity of them in a moment like this, right? And so we have to be thinking about ways that we're going to get people up that social and economic mobility ladder. The other lever that I think we need to concurrently be thinking about is the education system. And that we are, if we're not talking about how do we disrupt education in this moment, because it is the system that's feeding all of the other systems, right? It's our overdependency on our criminal and inequitable criminal justice system. It's why people can't get into home ownership. It is why we have such alarming health disparities. It's why we need to be thinking about growing small business development. So we really need to be thinking about that education system as the equalizer in our society and getting it right here. And that's opening up all pathways for individuals, and not just thinking about it in the traditional and defining success by a 4-year college degree, but we have an opportunity to put trades in the hands of Black and Brown communities that we know built a middle class. And so I think we need to really be thinking about those systems. So I would say, while yes, putting more models like this in community, like a North Market and others across our region, would be highly beneficial, and that everybody should be less than a mile away from a grocery store, right? To be able to create, but we have to think about the economics of how do we sustain that. So, and right now we just have such inequity around the economics between both people of color and whites, that we have to be figuring out how to close that gap.
Thank you so much, Adair, and thank you for turning that question on its head. I think there are so many opportunities when we do think about education too, and directly applying them in the community so people can see, why would I want to learn about that? Well, there are opportunities right here. I know that at the health department, we're working on efforts to tie math and science and solar energy, and showing that we are building solar energy right here in our city, and so that it's not just a remote thing, but it's a proximal thing that you can see and touch and feel, and also build a lot of skills and good paying jobs. So thank you so much. There's so much to talk about. Everything is interconnected, and you have shown us that in a very beautiful way today. So thank you so much. Is there any closing comments you want to make? Otherwise, I will remind people what comes up next.
Yeah, well, truly, again, as I opened, and I'll end in the same way, that I applaud you all for this examination of self, and also what the church or the institution can be doing, and having these bold and courageous conversations that I hope that all if COVID and the death of George Floyd didn't give us all pause, to really re-examine how do we move, how do we profess our and live out our Christian values, is the thing that I think you all are doing, and recognizing that we're certainly, not to sound Pollyannish here, but we're more alike than different, and finding those moments of commonality, and understanding that there has been a deep imbalance in our country, and that everyone wants to live this really true, just and free life. And so thank you all. Thank you for the opportunity to share our work with you today.
Thank you, and you give us a lot of hope and a lot of ideas of how to be part of making something new. So thank you.
Wonderful.
Next week, we are going to have as our guest Helen Jackson Lockett, who works with the Minnesota Department of Health, and she's going to be talking to us about public health and racial justice through the lens of infant mortality amongst African Americans. So I urge you to plan on joining us as we continue to explore what it means to be anti-racist, and as we strive to wade into the water and get busy. So thank you, everybody.